Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, next week, the coveted phrase will be Phase 2, as most of us hope for a further loosening of restrictions. We'll look tonight at how we're doing in meeting the criteria. We'll also report on special issues that the crisis is creating for kids in both education policy and healthcare. The good news is that there is action on the riverfront as the World Trade Center conversion continues, and riverboats are set to lead the way in the return of the cruise industry. We'll investigate behind the scenes. These stories, plus plans to make the French Quarter traffic-free, are on the agenda for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Anthony McCauley, reporter, The Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we go over to Dave first and sort of get an update, a status, how we're looking. The governor, on Monday is going to say, do we move along or not? How's it looking for us?
Well, by all measures, everything looks like the governor, after he evaluates the new data that he has this weekend, will likely tell us on Monday that beginning 1 week from today, we will enter phase 2 of reopening the economy across the state of Louisiana. Hospitalizations, 10 out of the last 11 days have gone down and are at their lowest levels since March, and it looks like that trend continues. Several hospitals in the area have closed their COVID wards now. Some hospitals have 0 coronavirus patients now, so that's all looking good. The case count has steadied. It's been level for weeks now, and it looks as if that's going to be encouraging. The patients presenting with COVID or COVID-like symptoms has been declining. So all of the measures they told us they're going to use to determine as we move from phase to phase appear to be in good shape across the state of Louisiana. And it looks like through phase 1 so far, we have not seen anything to cause a spike in the numbers, with the caveat that it does take 2 to 3 weeks often for the case count and the hospitalizations to catch up with the spread, because remember, this thing has an incubation period, and sometimes it takes 2 weeks for someone to become to a point where they can then spread the disease to others. But I expect on Monday, there's nothing that we've seen thus far that would stop the state of Louisiana from moving to phase 2 of reopening.
How about Metro New Orleans?
Well, the city of New Orleans specifically will not move to phase 2 anytime soon. We heard from New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell today and from the city health director, Dr. Jennifer Avegno, who in no uncertain terms said they are not going to move to phase 2 a week from today, even if the state does. The city health director called that premature. She said there has not been enough time for the effects specifically of Memorial Day to reveal themselves. She said she was afraid that many New Orleanians may have gone to Florida or other places that we saw with the packed beaches and other big gatherings over Memorial Day weekend, and says that data has not played itself out yet. She said it will be at least a few weeks before they even consider going to phase 2 in the city of New Orleans. So we're going to have a situation, it appears, where the rest of the state, including all of the other metro parishes, go to phase 2, which means more businesses that are currently closed will be allowed to open, and the businesses that have been open in phase 1 will be able to increase the percentage of their capacity of people who are inside of their business, while the city of New Orleans remains just as it is as we speak now.
So Jefferson Parish has really pulled ahead of Orleans Parish in terms of numbers and then hospitalizations. And in Jefferson Parish, are there less or new cases being reported now than Orleans?
Jefferson has consistently now shown more cases on a daily basis than has Orleans. Remember, the population of Jefferson is also larger, but Orleans has done a better job of reducing the number of new cases, or Jefferson is testing more people who carry the coronavirus, while the testing in Orleans is more people who don't. There's so many factors in this we don't know. But clearly, Jefferson now leads the way in the number of new cases and has had more deaths most days in the last couple of weeks than has Orleans. But that's not preventing Jefferson from following, as far as we know, we haven't heard anything to the contrary, from following the state's lead and continuing marching toward phase 2 of reopening as early as a week from today. a lot of people look at that and go, well, wait a minute, why, if
Hmm.
Orleans has fewer cases, fewer deaths, would they not reopen, but Jefferson would? Jefferson has made it clear, and President Cynthia Lee Shang has said she doesn't even have a doctor on her staff. So she relies on the state of Louisiana to advise her. The
Hmm.
state has set one of the assistant health directors to work very closely with the government in Jefferson Parish to advise her on what to do. But thus far, she has made it clear she's going along with the governor and the Louisiana Department of Health and their recommendations as we move forward. There's no doubt that the curve is flattened in Jefferson. It just has not flattened as much as it
Hmm.
has in Orleans. The number of new cases is way down compared to where it was months and just really weeks ago, and the number of deaths as well, but it is still higher than Orleans.
How are people responding to this reopening, at least to the extent that we've seen it? I mean, are people showing up at restaurants? Are they going into shops? What are we finding?
Not in mass. In fact, that's probably part of the reason that phase one has been, by all accounts that are measurable so far, so successful. Restaurants are not being overrun by patrons. There are not long lines of people waiting outside to get a table at the 25% capacity. Even outdoor seating areas are rarely full at any restaurants anywhere that we've been able to see. And the same goes for retail operations that are up and running, malls and everything else. People appear to be, by and large, still feeling more comfortable staying at home, still working from home. In fact, we analyzed our traffic patterns over these 2 weeks of phase one, and we've barely seen an increase of traffic from the stay at home order to phase one of the safer or safest at home order. People just are not en masse moving about. Now, I think Memorial Day was the exception to that. People, I think, for Mother's Day to some extent as well. The holidays appear to be having people kind of throwing caution to the wind a little more. But by and large, people are just not getting out. They're not, just because the government said, you can go eat at a restaurant now. You can go shop at more stores now. You can go to the mall now outside of the city of New Orleans. People just didn't rush out to do it en masse. And all the surveys we're seeing nationally and locally indicate it may be a while before people feel comfortable. A majority of people feel comfortable actually getting within 6 feet of other people.
Dave, I think part of it might be is that there's really less to offer out there. I tried reservations at a restaurant tonight, and they said they couldn't take me because of the 25% rule. So they were at capacity according to 25%. But if it had been like a normal night, they could have probably gotten a whole lot of other people. And I think people are getting used to it, that it's just harder to get into these places. And I went to Lakeside the other day, and it must have been maybe half of it was open, if that much. And the food court is closed. All the Centerport, where you have all the kiosks, that's all closed. And so it wasn't as festive as it used to be. And so I think the rules themselves are making it less attractive for people to want to go to these places.
Well, so the governor,
I think that's obviously a part of it.
the governor, June 5th, that's Monday, right? He's going to tell us what his plans are then. That's am I
June
right?
1st is Monday. He
June
will
1st, right,
announce
yes,
what will
June
happen
1st
on
is
June 5th, which is a week from today.
Right. Okay, we'll see how it goes and how people respond to it. Thanks a lot, Dave. Dawn, over to you. With the shutdown, kids have been at home a lot and not able to play with friends, et cetera, and then also maybe keep up with inoculations and just, regular well visits with doctors. Is that what we see happening?
That is absolutely what we see happening. On a national scale, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a study that found that in one state, in the state of Michigan, more than 50% of children were not getting their regular vaccinations. In terms of the federally funded Vaccines for Children program, which provides vaccines to more than 50% of the children in the United States of America, the amount of vaccines ordered for the March and April time period last year versus this year, 2.5 million fewer doses ordered, which means kids routinely aren't getting the vaccinations they're supposed to get at 6 months and 12 months and 18 months and 24 months. Those are the more critical years up until age 2. I talked to Nora Oates, who's a doctor with Hales Pediatrics locally, and she said they are seeing the same thing locally, where people just aren't coming in out of fear. And she said that can be very dangerous for a lot of reasons. One, you've got to get these vaccinations into people, or we're going to see a rise in the things that were preventable, measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, whooping cough, all those things will make a return if kids aren't vaccinated. But also those routine visits to your pediatrician, they look for developmental milestones. They see other problems that if they aren't addressed when they should be addressed, they can cause lifelong problems for those children. So they're urging people to please come in. It's actually safer now than it had been. They've worked on social distancing at Hales Pediatrics, for instance. They're saying, wait in your car. We'll call you when it's your time to come up if you're fearful to come in, but get your kids in because that's the way to keep them healthiest. And then on top of that, schools have pushed back the deadline for the health forms to get in for the next school year. So people are pushing back those well visits for that reason. That will cause two problems. One, again, kids aren't getting in for those well visits to be looked at by a pediatrician where they might notice something going on that a parent might not notice, a developmental issue happening or some quirk that a pediatrician really needs to see. The other thing that will happen is all these pediatricians' offices are going to, at some point before the start of the school year, get overwhelmed by people who need to get in. So they're saying they're open now. They've got policies in place. It's not just happening nationally. It is definitely happening locally. Bring your kids in and get them checked out before they end up with other problems.
Other problems, and also if you want to get them back into school, schools aren't going to admit the child if they're not up to date with their shots. You know.
Exactly. They're not going to do it.
Interestingly, though, we're hearing locally and nationally from a lot of parents who are not sure they're going to send their kids back to school in the fall. In fact, a national survey found more than...
We're going to talk about that in a little bit, Dave.
Yeah. Let's let's wait for that. Let's go right now over to Anthony. And Anthony, you looked into the redevelopment of what we know as the World Trade Center, which is becoming the Four Seasons Hotel, and some investment issues that they're kind of confronting that's related to a permanent visa, a green card, how that can be potentially offered. Tell us about it.
Well, it's one of the big marquee developments in the city. It's about a $500 million project, and it would be when it's completed the first fully five-star hotel. Plus, the top half is going to be given over to very expensive condos. The penthouses are supposed to be going for $4.5 to $5 million. But what's arisen recently, and it's partly because of the pandemic, is that they had been relying on a large part of their investment, about $120 million, to raise it from a program that's been very controversial in recent years called the EB-5 program, which allows basically wealthy investors, particularly from China, to get a fast track to a green card if they put in at least $1 million. It's gone up actually through legislation that passed last December because of the mostly Republican senators that are against the program, which they say has been open to fraud, and they worry about national security issues and so on. So they wanted to have it eliminated, but they tightened it up last December so that they've doubled the amount of investment and made it harder to get. So additionally, then, of course, President Trump has put, in April, he put on a ban for at least 60 days on all immigration. So the chilling effect of both of those moves has meant that the wait times for people who are putting money into these programs, into investments like the Four Seasons in order to get a fast-track green card, has ballooned out. And whereas it used to take maybe 2 years for them to get their green card after these investments, it varies from country to country, but for the Chinese, who've been the biggest source, that's ballooned out to 10 years. So for the Four Seasons, then specifically, they've raised, according to the people that are subcontracted to do this program for them, they've raised about $25 million compared to the $120 million that they were supposed to be putting into it so far. It means the project is becoming more expensive for the developers at exactly the wrong time, at exactly the time when you don't want to be opening a hotel and you don't want to be selling expensive condos in a tourist destination like New Orleans.
So the developers of the hotel, are they, signaling that perhaps this is really going to present difficulties for them in meeting their timeline? They're getting it done?
They have not. They haven't answered questions, to be honest with you, about the financing of it. in the latest comments that they have made, they've stuck with the December 2020 completion date. But I did notice that the comments included a much higher cost than the last time they talked about the cost of this project. They last year they were talking about 465 million. That now has gone up to 530 million. Also, they don't need to tell us. We already know that it's going to be much more difficult opening a hotel later this year than it was going to be before the pandemic, and also to sell very, very pricey condos. We already know that condos downtown they're the first to get hit in the downturn in the real estate market. We already know that. In April, we saw a big downturn in sales of property in Greater New Orleans generally. But the top end of the market downtown is the first, because those are people buying, like holiday properties, second properties.
But work is continuing on the project, the Four Seasons project.
Yeah,
and
sure.
It has been even during the lockdown, during the shutdown.
If you recall,
well, construction workers were. Construction workers were considered to be essential workers, so construction projects have been, by and large, been allowed to continue.
Okay. All right, real quickie, because we have to move on.
Now, I was going to say, if you recall, this project must have been delayed at least 2 years by litigation. There was one developer in particular who kept on challenging a lot of the legal things. And it was one delay after another. And so this thing could have actually been done a couple of years ago by now.
All right. Anthony, thanks a lot. And we're going to get back to you a little bit later to talk about riverboats. Right now, Errol, sticking with you, French Quarter, a plan to maybe make it traffic-free?
Well, the thing I say about the quarter is that the French Quarter is not what it used to be, but it never was what it used to be. It's constantly changing. It's it's a living space, and maybe it's not all that people expect. There are some people, I think, want to use like the Williamsburg model and want it to be kind of like this pristine type of community, but it's not that. It's a place where people live and where you have restaurants and bars and a lot of vitality. There are some people who say, oh, it's just a tourist trap. It's not that either. You got some really fine restaurants with Antoine's and Galatoire's and Arnaud's, and you look at the museums we have, and you look at the waterfront along the greatest river in the continent. So there's a lot to behold and a lot to experience in the quarter. And so I think this is part of the tug of war about making it something that it can't be and maybe not successful. The idea, and this was an interview that the mayor had with the staff of the Advocate, and so it was really the Advocate that did the initial reporting on it. She talked about it, making it a car-free area. She even said that's what it is, it's car-free. But can that work? I mean, is there any point in that? Parts of the quarter are not places where you'd have pedestrian malls if you go in some of the back areas. And of course, you need some access. You need it for the hotels and for the restaurants. If it was totally car-free, it would be a disaster for the quarter. Now, through the years, there have been various attempts to do something about traffic, to regulate it in different ways. Like Bourbon Street, for example, the traffic is blocked off for there most of the time. And along Royal Street on weekends and at nighttime. So there are times when some streets are closed, but I think after study after study, people say you need to be able to bring traffic in here. And anytime you do something with traffic flow, better or worse, it changes the ecology of things. It kind of reminds me of what happened with Mardi Gras when they banned the parades from going down Royal Street. Everybody said, well, what a great idea, no parades in Royal Street. What happened after that is you started having these large crowds just gathering around Bourbon Street, and that was the origin of all the activity from the balconies. When the balconies became the new parades, and it really just changed the environment. The Advocate article points out that once you stop traffic along Bourbon Street, you started getting more of a gathering with people with go-cups and just carousing. It may not have been the type of visiting that you wanted people to do, and so it's a very, very complex issue.
But that's it was just at an idea and talk stage. I mean, there's no formal plan for this, is there?
She says she's formed a Tiger Committee, whatever that is, that's been looking into it, and hopes to have a larger committee. It's an idea that I guess in degrees needs to be looked to, but it's not all as great as people always think it is.
Well, we'll see what that committee comes up with. Thanks a lot, E. Dawn, back over to you. Let's go over to that point of education and kids. So what are you finding out?
Well, as Dave was alluding to, there was a survey that came out this week that up to 59% of parents don't feel comfortable sending their kids back to school perhaps this fall. So schools are working with all sorts of different processes for what might happen come August. New Orleans Public Schools right now has a survey out for any stakeholders in the Orleans Parish school system. You can go to nolapublicschools.com and fill out that survey. You don't have to be a parent or a student. You can just be a member of the neighborhood. And it's everything from I feel comfortable to sending my kids to school. I would feel comfortable if there are temperature checks, or if there's more hand washing, or if there's mask wearing. From public schools to private schools, all of the school districts are working on multiple models of what school will look like. There's everything from regular school to staggered start times and different groups coming in the morning versus different groups coming in the afternoon, to some sort of distance learning still continuing. I was talking to a head of an independent school this week who told me, here's the problem that we're facing. What if you, Dawn Ostrom, get COVID, but your kids don't have it? Well, your kids can't go to school, but they're not sick. Your kids would have to be quarantined for 14 days. So they have to have some sort of synchronous learning that keeps them on task with their friends and their classmates, but they can't be at school. And we'll probably see a lot of that this fall, where there are some who can go to school, some who can't go to school. This Orleans Parish survey is the first one in our region to just say outright, would you send your kids to school? What would make you comfortable sending your kids to school? Jefferson Parish Schools, on the other hand, this week announced new start times for the year that really don't have anything to do with COVID-19. It's a plan they were already working on for cost savings and efficiencies with busing, where younger kids start earlier and older kids start later, and the school day kind of progresses through elementary school kids go first, then middle school, then high school. So they're making changes as if they will have normal school. Colleges are starting earlier so that they can stop at Thanksgiving and roll straight through Christmas break and then not go back until January, after maybe some peak flu season is over. So it's still way up in the air. And there's no telling when we might really have answers.
And Dave, let me go back to you real quick just to finish up that thought that you were commenting on.
Well, one of the interesting things we're hearing, and the numbers are that the 59% don't think they're comfortable sending their kids back to school. 20 plus more on top of that are sure they're not comfortable sending their kids back to school. But the thing I found most interesting was why. It's not that they don't trust the schools or the processes or how the plan works to try and contain the virus. Most of the parents said they don't trust their kids to socially distance from other children, that they're afraid that they will want to play, that they will want to get close to each other, that they won't see the importance of staying far apart from one another. So they fear that they'll be exchanging the virus unintentionally, even if the rules say they can't.
Just want to be kids. We got to move on to Tony right now, kind of just real quick, wrap. Dawn, did you have something?
I was just going to say a lot of this may change as we get to phase 2, if we actually ever do in Orleans Parish, and see if the numbers continue to stay down. I think you'll see a lot more confidence in parents across the board.
All right. Thanks a lot, both of you guys. Tony, we're going to wrap up with you. Riverboats are going to be the ones to take to cruising before the big cruise liners do, apparently.
That's the good news. The bad news is it's going to be just a toe in the water. There's a cruise starting on June 20th, one of the two big cruise lines, the smaller of the two in terms of the amount of passengers. But I'm sure they're going to be welcome along the river, Baton Rouge and New Orleans. They jump off and they go on excursions. Typically, they've taken very restrictive measures. They're going to have only as much as 75% of normal capacity, which is less than 200 anyway on these small river boats. They're the kind of excursion that is aimed at older, more affluent customers. So they are being very strict in terms of the measures that they're taking. They're allowing people to take room service, for example, for every meal. I guess, I'm not sure if that's going to be as much fun as, or even the purpose of going on these cruises. But at least it's a move in that direction. And then later in July, the second of the two riverboats that have Port of New Orleans as a home port will get going, but they haven't given a firm date for New Orleans yet. They're going to start out of St. Louis and head north to Minneapolis.
It'll just basically, bottom line, they're smaller, less people, so it's just really easier for them to get going with it. That's why they're going to get started.
Well, they're actually under the CDC guidelines. They're below the 250 passenger thresholds, the ones that are going to start first anyway. But I mean, for Port of New Orleans, the big question is the big cruise ships who have passengers typically of 2,000 to 4,000 and account for, like 1.4 million passengers. Was what they were expecting this year on the cruise lines. It's about 35,000 for the riverboats when they're at full swing. So that's the order of magnitude.
Any idea about cruise lines when we might start seeing them operate again out of our port? The
Not
big
yet.
ones?
They've only named the big ones. Have only named 3 U.S. ports in Florida and Galveston, 2 in Florida and 1 in Galveston, so forth for an August 1 start. But they. The risks are obviously quite a bit higher for those, and the CDC regulations are still unclear. They're definitely not allowing them to sail until the end of July, but they're taking a punt that they'll be allowed to go from the 3 ports on the 1st of August, and then we'll see thereafter.
All righty, sure will. Thanks a lot, Tony. Okay, we're going to wrap up everything, everybody. Other stories. Eve, start with you first.
Well, it's almost June, and among all the things that June means, it also means the end of crawfish season. This is when the crawfish shells start to get hardened. And this past week, LSU Agriculture advised the crawfish farmers about starting to prepare their ponds, starting to clean their equipment to end the crawfish season and get ready for next year.
Okay, Dave.
Well, we could actually see work on the Hard Rock Hotel site itself in the next couple of weeks. We got an update from the developers who say the demolition teams have successfully taken down now the buildings around and the cranes. They're working on that. And in 2 weeks, we may see them actually start to try to recover the 2 bodies that remain on that site.
Okay, Dave. Dawn, over to you.
In happier news, with some return to some level of normalcy, on June 1st, the Sculpture Garden in City Park will reopen with a fee because they have not been getting any income into the park. There will be a small fee to go to the Sculpture Garden. That's June 1st. And June 3rd, the Audubon Zoo opens. But you have to make reservations and have a time-stamped ticket to get in there. So it's all about crowd control. But go back and see the animals and the sculptures and kind of have somewhere else to go and something else to see.
What's the fee going to be? Do we know?
I believe it's $5 a person.
All right. Tony, over to you.
Well, I suppose I'm the bringer of bad news, but one to keep an eye on is the convention center. It's obviously a big barometer for the economy and whether or not things are getting worse there or getting better. And I'm afraid it's going to be more bad news about cancellations and financial difficulties for the convention center before it gets better.
Definitely challenging time. All right, guys, thanks a lot to all of you all for joining us, and thank you for joining us. And we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.